The ancient Egyptians held a complex set of beliefs about afterlife. An individual's life was seen as a series of changes, starting at birth, passing through adolescence, maturity, and then death. Although for many cultures death is an end, for ancient Egyptians, death is just another phase of life. For this reason, the body was treated as the most important, as for it was the vessel that took them through the process of life. The ancient Egyptians believed that an individual was composed of 5 parts: the physical body, the ba, the ka, the name, and the shadow. The physical body was referred to as the Ak. A person's ba was their personality. The ka was a life force, regarded as very important. It was considered an identical copy of the individual that kept the soul alive after death. Offerings were presented to the ka to feed the individual and keep the deceased living in afterlife. The name was the way an individual was identified, and without the ba and ka, would go missing. Lastly, the shadow was an individual's form of protection. For ancient Egyptians, attainment of an afterlife depended on the preservation of the body and the ability of the body to function. Therefore, the bodies were mummified to transform the corpse into a new eternal body. Due to the importance ancient Egyptians placed on an afterlife and the body, Egyptians sought for their tombs to be more permanent and secure than their homes. For this reason, archaeologists have found most ancient Egyptian art in their tombs. Ancient burial traditions and ceremonies were of high value for Egyptians. One example, and the focus of this project, is the evolution of the Books of the Dead. Focusing first on the Old Kingdom period, one example of ancient Egyptian burial traditions are the pyramid texts. Exactly how they sound: a collection of texts found within ancient Egyptian pyramid-shaped tombs. The passages served a variety of functions during the transformations to the afterlife. However, let us first examine their discovery and history. In the latter half of the 19th century, in 1880 to be exact, Gadsden Maspero first uncovered the pyramid texts of Unas, Pepi I, Pepi II, and Merene. Continuing into the beginning portion of the 20th century, expeditions led by the Frenchman Gustave Jacquer discovered 4 new chambers. Those are the king's wives, Neith, Iput II, Wedjibenti, and the pharaoh Ibi. In all, in the modern day, 11 texts have been discovered. Following their discovery, 3 versions of the pyramid text were translated into English. The first by Samuel B. Mercer in 1952, the second by Alexandre Piankoff in 1968, and another by Raymond O. Faulkner in 1969. As will be explored later, each version varies into a certain degree and provides strengths and weaknesses. But before commenting on their interpretations, let us analyze a few examples. To begin, we will start by focusing on the pyramid text of Unas. Unas was the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty and is buried in a pyramid complex at Saqqara, known as Perfect Are the Places of Unas. This tomb is of particular importance as it is the first discovered tomb with written text incised on the walls of its burial chambers. In resemblance to the other texts, the writings in the pyramids of Unas are inscribed mostly in vertical columns, divided into groups of spells. Each passage varies significantly in length. Common components to each portion included markers for recitation, direction, and chapter. Most importantly, the texts are a corpus or collection, and were to be read in specific order. In all, after withholding its position for over 4,000 years, the pyramid texts of Unas are the earliest examples of extended writing. Now we turn to the largest collection of texts from the pyramid complex of Pepi I for a more in-depth look. The texts of each pyramid typically contain 3 major types of events: the funerary procession and actions on the mummy, the offering ritual, and the burial ritual. In the tomb of Pepi I, one example is the resurrection ritual, including the opening of the mouth ceremony, in which the Egyptians performed actions on the mummy to allow eating and drinking in the afterlife. Due to the importance of the sun in Egyptian culture, another example is the text on the west wall of the antechamber. These included spells for proceeding to the Akhet, or place where the sun rises or sets, spells for entering the Akhet, and spells for passing from the Akhet and emerging to the sky. Finally, other texts include the spells from protection in the afterlife and other daily events. According to James B. Allen, the pyramid texts reflect not only on an Egyptian vision of the afterlife, but also on the entire background of Old Kingdom religious and social structures, and they incorporate an ancient worldview much different from that of more familiar cultures. However, let us look at a few other interpretations. Let us focus on the scholars previously mentioned, Samuel Mercer, Alexandre Piankoff, and Raymond Faulkner. Mercer believed the pyramid texts were not the work of a single man, or of a single age. They are entirely anonymous and of uncertain date. Pienkopf was the only one to initially believe the text needed to be read in a specific order. He supposed the recitation began in the corridor leading into the tomb, then transitioned into the antechamber for the king's ascension before moving into the burial chamber for deification. Additionally, he agreed the text described a mystical journey through the afterlife, including the king's resurrection and new birth. Faulkner's text, which is considered the standard English translation, reiterates the deceased post-mortem journey to the stars. However, he also takes it a step further, believing the text to be religious and funerary literature. The pyramid texts are to the Old Kingdom as the coffin texts are to the Middle Kingdom. The coffin texts give an additional, in-depth look into the Egyptian afterlife. Coffin texts often include inscriptions down to the center of the inner coffin lid and around all four sides. They also appear on the interior of the inner coffin in vertical bands of hieroglyphs. These inscriptions were often written in blue and green on a white or yellow background. These texts are known to contain spells for protection in the afterlife from such things as the supernatural. For example, the inscriptions down to the center of the coffin often depicted as offerings to Anubis, while the sides portray prayers to Osiris, Anubis, Isis, and Nephthys. The text also covers such topics as ensuring the material welfare of the deceased and protection from the everyday dangers of afterlife. After all, their main function and essential part of Egyptian burial culture was to ensure a good burial and provide the necessary preparations for a safe and enjoyable transition into the afterlife. Unlike the pyramid text, the spells are written directly on the coffins instead of the walls of the pyramid. According to Megan Wollos, the interior of the coffin would be painted with the following elements, although many coffins did not contain the entire repertoire: a false door with the horse eyes above it, object friezes, coffin text, offering friezes, menus of offerings, offering tables, and depictions of the deceased and people bringing offerings. Some examples include depictions of star-filled skies and the sky goddess Nut. In fact, these serve as some of the most common examples evident in the Old Kingdom pyramid text and maintaining importance during the construction of coffin texts. Additionally, she claims that there are regional differences apparent across various coffins. For example, coffins in northern Egypt tended to be decorated with brighter colors in comparison with southern Egypt. Further, southern Egypt focused more energy on decorating the outside of the coffin and depicting human figures than those of northern Egypt. Lastly, we will discuss the New Kingdom in the Book of the Dead in regards to the ancient Egyptian burial ritual. The Book of the Dead, also known as Going Forth by Day, developed from coffin text, was a collection of illustrations and spells scribed on a papyrus roll, and the text illustrated with vignettes. They were then placed in the tomb and gave the deceased the knowledge they needed to journey through the afterlife. After the mummification process, a process in which all but the heart is removed and the body is preserved in linen, the spirit of the body uses the papyrus to pass through the underworld, or duat. There are many obstacles presented in the underworld, but the Book of the Dead contains spells and prayers that help the individual pass through this phase of reaching afterlife. The Book of the Dead first developed in Thebes around 1700 BC. The Book of the Dead became widespread for the first royal family members and then other members of society later on. The Book of the Dead presents a new spell that was not included in pyramid or coffin text, which is spell 125, weighing of the heart. This ceremony was done by the god of Osiris, in which it was decided if the spirit did enough good in their life to pass on to the afterlife. When a person died, they were guided by Anubis into the Hall of Truth. If Osiris, thought Anubis, and the 42 judges decided his confession was accepted, the heart of the deceased was weighed and balanced against the feather. If the heart was heavier and weighted by sin, acceptance to the afterlife would be denied. But if the heart and the feather balanced, afterlife was granted. The text in the papyrus was often individualized for the deceased, but often they were written in advance, and once a person died, their name was added to the text. The text can be categorized into four main divisions: the Heliopolitan version, which was edited by the priest of the college at Anu; the Theban version, a hieroglyphic and hieratic character version, closely related to the Theban version, which had no fixed order of chapters, used mainly in the 20th dynasty, and the Sage version, which has a strict order, which is after the 26th dynasty. The Papyrus of Eni was acquired by the trustees of the British Museum in 1888. It is said to be the largest and most perfect papyri. It is dated to about 1500 to 1400 BC. The Papyrus of Eni was 78 feet and separated into 37 sheets.